Well, hello everybody and welcome to Quench, all of you in the in-person audience here. And everybody watching at home on YouTube, this is so cool to have you with us. Quench is really about connecting and sharing quality time together, and that's why we're so excited to be in our new home live at the CIA at Copia in the Napa Valley, because it is, of course, the heart center of wine, food, and the arts, originally created by Robert and Margaret Mondavi, collaborating with Julia Child and many other people that are really at the center of that whole thing, connecting people through wine, food, and the arts. Tonight, I'm excited to have, first and foremost, another in-person audience. Let's just take a look and everybody and say a little bit of a hello. You guys wave to the folks at home. And we're so excited to have all of you with us for tonight's very, very cool theme. I'm calling it Goated Grapes. And this is the start of a very, very interesting series that leads up to what the entire wine world is celebrating as the 50th anniversary of the 1976 Judgment of Paris tasting. How many people have heard of that event? All right, so you've been under a rock if you haven't, right? Because 50 years ago, May is when California Chardonnays and Cabernets slightly, ever so slightly, bested French top white Burgundies for Chardonnay and top red Bordeauxs for Cabernet Sauvignon. And I say slight because in a tasting like that was held on that day, there were no losers. But we're going to talk tonight all about Chardonnay, which is, of course, the grape that was featured. But before we do that, I want to just thank our welcome wine, all of you who came here to the in-person experience, which is 5 fantastic wines and food bites from the Grove restaurant here. You had a welcome wine on your way in, which is the Chandon by the Bay Blanc de Blanc. And we'll show that one. It's a beautiful bottling. And just a little show of hands here. How many people know what Blanc de Blanc means? And what does it mean? Let's yell it on out. White from white. So that makes it the perfect, and we'll switch back, that makes it the perfect thing for us to have as an introduction to our theme for tonight, which of course is all about Chardonnay, because in the Champagne region of France, the white grape, the one and only white grape, is the Chardonnay grape. Here in California, sometimes they will blend in some Pinot Blanc and some other things, and I think this Blanc de Blanc by the Bay has that. But Chandon is a really fun story, which we'll come back to in terms of the formative years of the Napa Valley, which are, of course, what the Paris tasting was all about. But on our topic of goated grapes, I have an interesting thing, which is that a lot of you who come to California, Napa Valley wine country, you know that we're a very rural, very agricultural society, but we're also a very popular place to go. It's the #2 tourism destination after Disneyland in the state of California. And so sometimes there's a little bit of traffic. So a couple of one of my guests is running a little bit late, but we'll be talking to him when he gets here. Mickey is not coming. Mickey and wine don't mix. I've learned that many years ago, and that makes sense for sure. But we'll be talking to David Ramey, who's a real Chardonnay guru. But I just want to go ahead and have everybody, let's go ahead and grab your first glass here, glass number 1. And the wine that we're trying is a French white Burgundy. And let's just take a look at that region. So this is the country of France, and everybody knows you're really the mothership for classical wines, right? And so if you look in the east there, you see the Burgundy region listed, and you see it listed as being associated with Chardonnay and Pinot Noir grapes, right? And so when I say it's the mothership, Burgundy is the region in France where Chardonnay as a varietal wine, a single variety, originated. And so when we think of the classic Chardonnay wines, we think of Burgundy. So let's go ahead and give it a try. And this is the Marc Colin Saint-Aubin, which is interesting. Let's go ahead and take a look at the label, actually, of this wine, because what you're going to see is that there's a lot of information on the label, but what's missing? Audience. Even more important, for at least the style, the Chardonnay grape is nowhere listed on the label. So you see Saint-Aubin, and I've showed you the beautiful region there, Saint-Aubin. You can see that picture that I shot probably 10 years ago. And then you also see Premier Cru, and that means first rate or first ranked vineyard. And so you get lots of information on the label, but not the grape variety, which makes it pretty hard for people who don't know. It's one of those if you know, you know types of things. And now you know that French white Burgundies are based on the Chardonnay grape. So if you go ahead and swirl it and give it a smell though, even if you are not a blind taster, you would probably, if you're a Chardonnay lover, recognize this wine as that style. And it looks like I have maybe my guest has arrived. So let's take a break here for a second and introduce and welcome David Ramey, who I think probably has a microphone on. So great to have you. Thank you so much. Please have a seat, and I'm going to hand you your first wine, but I'll let you sit down first.
All right, thank you.
And why David Ramey? And we're going to talk a lot about Chardonnay, but David Ramey of Ramey Cellars, first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's so great to have you here.
This is, I have to say, it's completely unexpected. I didn't know there was a live audience. I thought this was just was a podcast, you know?
It's a podcast, but you know, any more these days, people are filming their podcasts. But what I love about the way we do it here is we don't have the headphones on, so I can stand up and spin around and be like, I have David Ramey on the stage with me, because he is truly the guru, the GOAT of Chardonnay winemaking in California. Now there's a family tree, there's a coterie of your kin who are really, really good at making Chardonnay. But I want to start with very simply, we're drinking French white Burgundy right now, the Saint-Aubin Premier Cru en Monco from Domaine Marc Colin. I showed him the map of Burgundy, or map of France where Burgundy is, and I showed them the label. We talked about how there's no Chardonnay on the label in classical white Burgundy, but what I want to start with you is, why do you think Chardonnay is a goated grape? And by that I mean, of course, the sports term, greatest of all time. One of the best.
Oh, well, it's pretty straightforward. Chardonnay is the red wine of whites because of barrel fermentation and malolactic. Now, both of those can be overdone. California Chardonnay has perhaps in some cases deservedly gotten a bad rap for being buttery and oaky and high alcohol. My wines are not that way, and since Bob Parker retired, many of them are not. So, but Bob did not like acid, and he didn't mind 16.3% alcohol. In fact, they got high scores, but those days are pretty much over.
Well said. And the thing that's interesting, I'm so glad that you mentioned acid. Acid is why we drink wine as opposed to other alcohol beverages. Acid is the reason that food tastes better with wine, right? It's the salt. It's the dancer with salt that makes other food flavors pop. And on that note, we do have Chef Chris Limerand from the Grove here, who prepared this amazing plate of bites that you get to try. I'll take you on a little quick tour of it, and what I'd like you to do before we move along from the French Chardonnay is you've got a little demi-tasse spoon and you've got a little dish. And if you're at home, you don't have this, but you can watch the last episode and learn how we do the brunoise, which means really fine dice of shallot. Why we do shallot, we talked a lot about that, but it brings earthiness and it brings sweetness and sophistication. So it's just sweated in a little butter, and then for the purposes of Chardonnay enhancement, it didn't need anything to be enhancing the Chardonnay, but it has a little bit of vanilla bean. So you can actually smell it, and you'll smell that vanilla bean, and that really brings up this nice element that mimics the sweetness that you get, or the vanilla character that you get from oak. So give that a try. And we're doing this even though we have a lot to cover when it comes to Chardonnay. Sharing it with food is what it's all about. So taste a little bit of the shallot, chase it with that Burgundy white, and tell me what you think.
I'm not used to that overt vanilla in a Chardonnay match. It makes it seem more like a candy or a dessert, even though it's not sweet. That's what it seems like to me.
I'm digging it. maybe I like candy and dessert, but
Well, I see some chocolate here, which we'll discuss
yeah,
later.
we'll discuss that. Yeah, I'm already in big trouble. I can tell. I'm
Yeah.
in very big trouble. Okay, but I think, and one thing to think about too, though, is when you're having the shallots, you're usually going to have them like maybe tossed into pasta, or you're going to have it napped over a piece of like seared fish or something like that. So it's really a little bit of an accent. But what do you think? What do you think of those flavors? The taste profile. It's kind of a nice little match there. It's a way of, you can go sort of two different directions, and sometimes both at the same time with matching wine and food, in terms of both complement and contrast. In terms of contrast, we've got these beautiful, because popcorn. We've got popcorn. And I know that the French would probably be like, why are you drinking popcorn with classical French white Burgundy? And I would be like, because we can. But it's a really good match. So go ahead and try a little bit of popcorn with the first Chardonnay if you haven't done that so far. A little bit more, though, David, about why Chardonnay is a goated grape. You mentioned about sometimes styles being overblown. And I think that aside from those styles that are emphasizing maybe some sweetness, alcohol, and excessive of that buttery character that comes from the malolactic, getting away from those, which are commercially popular, and we have to recognize that, across price points, even at the entry level, Chardonnay tends to over-deliver when it's well made. Do you agree with that?
I would. I mean, I name names. I mean, KJ Vintner's Reserve is one of the most popular Chardonnays that carries some sugar. I mean, you know, classically, when Jed Steele started making it for Jess Jackson up in Lake County, you had a stuck ferment, and they ended up bottling it, and that set the style for decades. So they're still, I don't think they're quite as sweet as they used to be.
Right.
For a long time, they're around 3/4 of a gram per liter, 7.5 grams per liter.
7.5, okay.
Yeah, 0.75%. Now it's more like about 0.3%, something like that. So they've dried it up a little bit. But there's a famous saying, is American wine drinkers talk dry and drink sweet. So
right, exactly, and it's true. And that sometimes that little bit of sweetness is mimicking or enhancing maybe the presence of the fruit, which can be a nice piece. I also think, though, at higher price points, but not finance bro price points, Chardonnay can blow your mind. And that's what I think makes it a goated grape as well. Your highest priced wine is a fraction of the cost of so many great wines out there. I'm not telling you to raise your price, but don't you think that's another piece that Chardonnay really delivers a lot for the money on the quality end without charging crazy prices?
Well, again, it's the most complex white wine because of malolactic, because of barrel fermentation, and you don't need too much oak. Our Russian River Chardonnay, which is our biggest product, is about 10 or 12,000 cases a year by the glass in many restaurants across America. That's only 10% new oak. Now, it's all barrel fermented, spends 12 months on the East Lees, but it's only 10% new. So it's simple. I mean, it's like this thing about over oak Chardonnay. It's just like, geez, it's like a chef who was adding too much sugar to the food, and then all he or she had to do was just back off a little bit.
Right, just let the fruit be its thing. We'll get more into, you talked about barrel and malolactic, and we'll get more into that in a second in terms of those techniques and what they contribute to the wine. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to go to wine number 2. Because we talked about France being the mothership of the Chardonnay grape and the Burgundy region specifically. Number 2 is a wine from Oregon, specifically the Lingua Franca Avni Chardonnay, and it is a collaboration. There's my master sommelier colleague Larry Stone, and if you guys know the winery, you know their brand ambassador Kate Clonch. I was up there with them, with my collaborators on a documentary that I'll tell you about in a second, and got a chance to talk to Larry about the idea of how French vintners really connected with the terroir of, and we'll talk more about terroir in a second, but the growing conditions, the culture, the soul of Oregon. And so this is a collaboration with Larry, with Dominique Lafon, originally. And what are your thoughts about how they sort of related to the Oregon style of Chardonnay? And let's go ahead and try this number 2. I think you're going to see a family resemblance where the acid is pretty racy and pretty lifted.
But it's fuller in the palate than
exactly.
the Burgundy is.
Yes, quite a bit. But the Oregon, the French really seem to relate a lot to the Oregon as a place, and specifically the Willamette Valley, for pursuing. Maybe I should just say the Burgundians, not so much the French broadly, but the Burgundians.
Because driving down here from Healdsburg, you pass 3 French sparkling wine houses.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just Oregon that's been attractive
100%
to French. Well, it's cooler up there. I would argue that our Sonoma Coast in Sonoma County is as cool without the constant threat of rain. Our daughter Claire.
By the way, are you a grandfather now?
She asked. Our Claire's son Wren, W-R-E-N, it's Celtic, was born on my 75th birthday, Monday, January 30th.
I saw her out of office, like I'm on maternity leave, so I'm like, wait, we've got the Grand Poobah of Chardonnay, but he's also a grandpa. Yes. Congratulations.
Thank you. What were we talking about?
Sorry, I got us off track. But we were talking about that the French were quite attracted to California, but
the trouble. My daughter Claire, our daughter Claire, and that's my wife Carla, sitting right there in the penultimate row.
Co-founder of Ramey Cellars.
Yes. They're attracted to it because it's more on their latitude,
right?
And so they think, climate's going to be the same. But our daughter Claire went to Reed College for 4 years, and she used to refer to the Portland climate as pukey white skies. It's just overcast a lot.
A lot.
Whereas the California coast, we have that ocean fog, and if you go to the coast, drive to the coast in the afternoon, you can often still see the fog banks sitting out there. And then the interior warms up during the day, it sucks that cold fog in, and then it looks like it retreats, but the sun the next day is actually nibbling back at the front of the fog bank. It's just burning it off.
Right.
And if you go out in the middle of the day, you often can see that fog bank right out there. And that's what gives us a cool climate. But then when it pushes back out, we have blue skies.
Right.
So.
And it's interesting that the number of times I've been in Burgundy where they also have a pretty overcast sky. It's pretty typical, and when you see that, I got a sunny day picture that I got to show the audience, but it's comparable, right? It's very similar.
Yeah, I would say, yeah. It doesn't mean that it's better. I mean, for many years before, quote, global warming, the weather in Burgundy was pretty spotty. I mean,
to get the fruit ripe enough for a crop.
When Americans in the trade talk about it was a good vintage or wasn't a good vintage, they're acknowledging the variable climate. Whereas, it's California. We have sunshine, and if you get closer to the coast, then it's cooler, and you plant Pinot Noir and Chardonnay or Syrah. And if you're in Napa Valley, like everybody else now, you plant Cabernet Sauvignon, because Cabernet is a late ripening variety. It benefits from the heat that the Mykonos range blocks that ocean influence, and so the Napa Cabernets get the extra heat that they need to ripen. You don't normally plant Cabernet Sauvignon in the Russian River.
Right. Yeah, bad idea, right? Although we had to learn that.
There's some.
And we had to learn that in the space of really a generation.
Healdsburg, where we live, is still Russian River, and yet the Healdsburg, which is right at the juncture of Alexander Valley, Cabernet Sauvignon, Dry Creek Valley, Cabernet and Sauvignon Blanc, and then Russian River Valley, which is Chardonnay and Pinot.
So you kind of got it. You got it all in a short space or a short distance, and I think that's the what has probably been such a strong suit for California. Going back to the idea of terroir, and I'd love everybody to try the Lingua Franca before we move on from it. Try it with some of the popcorn, but you also have from a garden herb salt in one of your little demi cups there. You may want to just try a little bit of the garden herb salt with the popcorn and the wine, because it's going to help you to kind of get a little bit of that savory sort of salinity that's coming off of the wine, and I think kind of balance it out a little bit too, because the acid on it needs a little bit of balancing. But I just want to check in with our crowd here. Are we so far so good? Awesome. And I want to check in with the home viewers to just remind you to like the channel, subscribe, tell your friends. And this is really an experience that you should come and enjoy in person. If you're visiting the Napa Valley, check out our schedule. But if you can't, do your own watch party and get some of the wines and get some snacks together. Popcorn is easy, right? And enjoy this along with us. Let's go back though to a little bit more about the French-American friendship, because this year we celebrate America 250, which was, of course, our revolutionary partners were the French, and they helped us to have a country at all. And but they've also brought us another gift besides the Statue of Liberty and besides success in the American Revolution, and that is the gift of terroir, the idea that time and place and human endeavor at a high level create something that captures that moment and that you can experience and take with you into a memory. That's my definition of terroir. Why do you think it is that Chardonnay broadcasts that so well?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, I don't know. What I can say is when you talk about terroir, I'd like to be more specific. So, in my 45 years making wine here locally, I've dealt with heavy clay soils, most carneros, gravelly soils. Actually, the Durrell Vineyard, just outside of, is like it's got clay, but it's got gravel too. And then there's sandy soils. If you go to Lodi, you're basically growing in sand. And mostly, there's two aspects that affect then the plant. And one is water holding capacity. Okay, so like sand is a little tough because water drains right through it. And gravel, clay, the other problem is it's just like, wet feet kind of. And so water holding capacity, and then nutrients. Some soils, and I've dealt with them in Sonoma County. I mean, you could crop. We had at Chalk Hill, we had a vineyard on Shiloh Road. It was a split canopy. If we didn't thin it, it would crop at 12 tons to the acre. And I could make a decent wine out of it. I had to talk Fred Firth into letting me thin it because he thought we were just throwing wine on the ground.
And you were.
But I could make a B- or B grade Chardonnay at 12 tons. At 8 tons, I could make an A- Chardonnay. There's that difference. You do not need to go to almost nothing. If you get some winemaker telling you, oh, we thinned it, we pruned it to 1 ton an acre, that's bullshit. I mean, that's just poor management.
Yeah, and balance, it's not just like less is always more. It's balance is
it's
where
balance,
it sits. And
yeah.
I think what you said about that midpoint, it's sort of like you can think of, tomatoes that are overwatered and that don't have any tomato flavor.
Yeah.
It's a classic one, right?
Very similar.
We've all had that.
Yeah.
And so you're really balancing that moment where the plant uses the water to give the flesh, but not so dilute all the rest of the flavor profiles, and it's true across plants.
Yeah.
Before we move on from the Lingua Franca, just be sure, if you haven't done it already, to try that with the Euphoria cheese. This is a sheep's milk. It is Euphoria, right, Chef? Yeah, it's a sheep's milk cheese, so it's spelled E-W-E, Euphoria, as in homage to the lady sheep who gave the milk to make it. And it is truly, in my household, from the time the kids were really little, they called it mommy cheese. Because I would be like, try some mommy cheese, and they became so used to this, because I love this cheese with wine, but especially with barrel fermented Chardonnay styles across the spectrum. And to David's point, the Avni Chardonnay is barrel fermented, but it doesn't have a bunch of new barrel on it. We'll talk more about what the barrel does, whether it's new or not, because it isn't there to always give flavor, but it's there to give a lot. But we were talking about terroir, and I just want to do a reveal at this point, because I feel very strongly that the 1976 Paris tasting, one of its biggest messages was that terroir exists outside France. And most of us didn't necessarily understand that. You worked in France, so you did. But most of us didn't understand that, and people who felt like they had potential in their regions really probably came to believe in the California spirit and the California motivation to show that is actually something that goes far beyond France. So what I'd like to do, and I actually have my collaborators on this documentary project, Partners 2 Media, Tim Klott and Noel Resnick in the audience here. Everybody, y'all wave so that our home audience can say hello to them. But we have been working on a documentary called The Swirled Cup. And it is not about a 50th anniversary reenactment of the Paris tasting, because our belief is that was so much more than a tasting on a day in Paris and 2 winning wines, but really about a movement and mavens like David who met the moment and really brought something new to the rest of the world. So we're going to watch a little trailer of this. Even if you've never been to California, you probably know that here in the Napa Valley, wine is king. But it wasn't always that way. A little wine tasting was held in Paris to introduce upstart California wines to France's best tasters.
I'd never tasted California wine before, and my managing partner was a lady called Patricia Gallagher, and she was so proud of her country and furious that Paris had no California wine.
We had celebrated 4th of July here in Paris, but with just the wines we could find, and they were dreadful.
It was too much of a risk to me to have these wines damned with faint praise. And so I told Patricia, I said, I'm going to choose the 4 best white Burgundies from the shop and the 4 best red Bordeaux and put them in blind.
One little twist. Their friend, George Tabor, a Time magazine reporter, was also there.
I was just lucky I was free that day.
He didn't get out his notebook until he heard tasters confusing Napa wines with French wines.
It just was meant to be another interesting wine tasting. And I never realized that, it was going to be the moment of history.
It's completely leveled the playing field across the world of wine.
Our Chardonnay had been $4 for the previous year, 1972. Now it skyrocketed it to $6 a bottle.
Stephen Spurrier was also very influential in that he was a great promoter of the underdog.
He was pushing all of us to be who we are today.
Nobody thought that it could be even possible to compete with the great French wine.
So once my father actually received the California inspiration, he literally says, why not me in Argentina?
If Andre Telechev was mentoring on wine quality, Robert Mondavi was mentoring on wine business.
And that mentoring spirit spilled over into the terroirs of wine, food, and travel all over the world. Wine became a passport.
export, and wine country became a destination all its own.
I believe that when there is a terroir, whatever happens there, whatever grows there, whatever traditions and cultural customs develop there, it's this unique blend of things that could not have happened anywhere else. And if it's really good, it finds its way into your heart.
So I think you can see that this is a little bit, well, how many people, first of all, how many people knew that it wasn't some wine competition between California and France? Okay, so less than half the room. Most of us, including me, until I started talking to Stephen Spurrier about it in 2020, thought it was a competition. It was just a tasting of California wines, instigated by Patricia Gallagher, an American who believed that California wine quality was something that should be introduced to their French expert colleagues. It was Stephen at the last minute who said, ooh, I need to throw those 4 best Burgundies and 4 best red Bordeauxs, white Burgundies and red Bordeauxs, in from the shop so that they don't think, oh, we're just tasting California wine, and they go, yeah, they're fine. Yeah. And look what happened. And again, the scores were close, but the fact that they were close means that, wow, we arrived, right? And so that's why I wanted to talk to you about this, because you were there. You, at the same time, were part of this kind of legendary class of winemakers at the time who were digging into what we had here in terms of potential. And it's a 2.5-minute trailer, but we talk a lot about the work that Zelma, and of course you with her, did on Chardonnay vinification, and it even benefited the French in Burgundy.
Yep.
So let's go to the picture of David's winery, because you're going to see a lot of the tools of the trade right there. So you see, first of all, you see intact grape clusters. You see lots of different vessels, and there's a lot that you guys did in your research that really helped to make Chardonnay quality a completely different thing from what it was then.
Well, let me just say, let me elaborate a little bit.
And pick up your glass number 3 and start tasting the Ramey Cellars West Side Farms.
Oh,
this is number 3.
So this is our estate Chardonnay.
This is your estate Chardonnay, 2018 vintage, people. This is liquid proof.
Oh, this is 2018?
Yes,
okay.
This is liquid proof. That great Chardonnay gets better with age. Yet another reason it is goated. Right? Because we want the wines to get better with age like we do. That's our story, and we're sticking with it. Okay, go ahead.
So, well, I don't know. We're kind of all over the map.
We're all over the map.
So
that's me.
When I first shoveled Chardonnay grapes in 1978 at Lambert Bridge Winery. They didn't have a must pump to get the grapes to the destemmer, and everybody was doing overnight skin contact, and that means you destem the grapes and then put them in a tank and let them sit. And temperature wasn't a factor. I mean, they were hot. I remember Lambert Bridge, my friend Nick Martin was the winemaker, and then we come in the next day and drain that tank like a red fermenter, drain the juice, shovel out, pump with a meat grinder, pump the skins into a press. And the tannins were out of this world. So just a little word about tannin. The tannins I'm talking about are flavonoid tannins. They're from the grape skin, whether the grape is red or white, okay? In red grapes, those flavonoid tannins can form a dimer, and then a trimer, and then a tetramer, and finally a polymer, a long chain of color tannin, color tannin, color tannin. In white wine, you don't have the anthocyanin, you don't have the color to do that. And so what happens if you have a lot of tannin from the skins, as we used to, 78, 79, 80, etc., the wines turn brown in the bottle in about 4 years. I remember dumping Dick Arrowwood's Chateau St. Jean Chardonnays down the drain when they were 4 years old because he was doing skin contact, and what happens is with the tannins in white wine, they oxidize, they turn brown. They don't have anything to polymerize with. So unlike red wine, where high tannin wines they age longer because they got more tannin, with white wines, it's the opposite. You need to lower the tannins so that they can't turn brown, okay? And I had a role in that with two things, and Zelma and I kind of worked on this together, but our Salzwerke, our filter pad, I don't filter anymore, I don't own a filter, but at the time we filtered everything, and Fritz Neurath, this charming guy, gave us a paper by a German researcher, Müller-Spaeth, and it was about natural polyphenol oxidized tannin in white wine. Now this is the same enzyme that
makes an apple turn brown.
You cut an apple, let it sit on you watch it turn brown, exact same enzyme.
Yep.
And it used to be thought that green juice was essential. If I'm going to have color, decent color in a wine, then I got to have green juice. It turns out it's almost the opposite. Think champagne. Champagne is the lowest tannin white wine around, and it ages really well because the tannins are low. They're not there to oxidize. If they were there, they would oxidize because they can't polymerize. So
it's basically like getting the free radicals out of your system as a human.
Yeah.
You're basically getting the tannins. They precipitate them out before they ever bottle the wine, and so then the wine is going to age beautifully.
Yep.
And it's like oxygen is important to fermentation, but oxidative processes on those tannins make the wine not age well. Correct?
Yeah. You don't need oxygen to oxidize something. There's a whole in your chemistry textbook, there's a whole chain of redox potential. It's basically electron transfer. It goes from here to there, and pretty soon you're at the bottom end of the chain. But anyway, so...
Note to self, what is redox and electron transfer? We'll ask ChatGPT later.
So
Just kidding.
I can't help myself. 4.5 years of science, I just like, it's like...
Look, this is the best science right here, right?
So, where was I?
I want to get you on.
No, before that, I remember where I was. So the next thing, oxidized juice was one. You let the enzyme drop out the tannins, and then in the oxidized state, they have a negative charge, the yeast are positive charge, so during the fermentation, they drop out. You start with brown juice, you end up with nice clear wine, okay? The other thing was skin contact, okay? And we were doing that at CME, I was doing it, but Zelma she'd gone to Australia right before we started to work together, and she brought back the idea at CME of a must heat exchanger and these 4 dejuicing tanks above the press. So we would put everything in there and we could chill it. And I had an idea one year. I said, Selma, I want to do an experiment. And so I did it, and I presented it at the ASEV convention, which was at Disneyland that year. And I wrote a paper, The Effects of Skin Contact Temperature on Chardonnay Juice and Wine. And immediately, the big wineries went out and bought must heat exchangers. Beringer, Mondavi, St. Jean, they all did that. But then I started thinking, when I left CME to go to Matanzas Creek, I thought, I'm sort of a classicist. I thought, well, I'm not going to do skin contact. I'm going to do it the way they do in Burgundy, which was the destemmer. You take the cage out, so you're not destemming, but you crush with the rollers, crush the whole grape clusters, and then a big gentle pump it into the press. And that was pretty much the Burgundian method. But I started thinking, wow, what if we still have the little screw below the destemmer, we still have the pump. What if we just put whole grapes in the whole cluster in the press? And so I sort of introduced that. And now if you go around to wineries, you'll see a stainless steel hopper on top of all the presses. It's very rare that you don't, because everybody's copied that. And the key, the reason is, along with brown juice for lower tannins, is no skin contact. It's just gentle pressing and get the juice out. So unlike red wine, white wine, low tannin is the key to, one of the keys to ageability in the bottle.
So and I really think that is such a big thing for Chardonnay. It's revolutionized Chardonnay in that short space of time.
The California Chardonnays did not age in the 80s, and then partly through my work, now they do.
And it started right away. I posted on Instagram last week, I posted a picture that right after we reopened Windows on the World in 1996 from the first terrorist attack, I was pouring one of the wines that you had made, a Chalk Hill wine when you were at Chalk Hill, and really sort of anchored their style. Yeah. And our wine had been in the 5th level below grade when that first bomb happened, our whole collection. And so 3 years later, that was in 1993, we reopened in 1996, we got the collection back. And so that was already wine that we had cellared a little bit, and it had cellared another 3 years. And we were pouring this 7 or 8 year old Chalk Hill Chardonnay in 1997 that was phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. So it happened quickly. In other words, are you looking for something that I can help you find?
Nope.
Oh, okay, you got it. All right, good. Okay, cool.
It's springtime, you know.
It's allergy time. Everyone's getting that. Hopefully everyone's enjoying the wines. So the 2018 Ramey Cellars, the Westside Farms, this is their estate. Did we show that? It's a beautiful estate. We should show that label really quickly. Look at that. I wanted to.
Yeah, that's our vineyard. There's the mustard in it, and there's the old hop kiln and baling barn.
That's exactly why I put the label and the bottle where I did, because I didn't want to cover up the gorgeous old buildings. But we can. I just want to make sure everyone tasted that. And what I would love for you to do, if you haven't done it, well, you wouldn't, because you wouldn't have thought of this. Put a little truffle salt. Right, that's the other salt that you have, with the shallots. Taste that with this wine, and I think you're going to see a really, really nice balance of how the flavors come together and how salt and acid are really nice to balance the fruit in the wine, the natural sweetness and earthiness in the shallots, okay? So to me, that is just a total win. And if you were, sauteing up some shrimp or just a plain pasta and just throw a little bit of that vanilla bean shallot piece, make sure you have the right amount of salt. It's such a nice flavor combination. I'm going
to editorialize here. The World Health Organization has tried to screw things up recently, and focusing on cancer, they said there is no safe level of alcohol consumption. And they're mixing wine, which is a food, it's fermented grape juice, with bourbon, with scotch. And so wine goes with food, lunch and dinner, And maybe, I remember seeing an interview with Bob Mondavi. And he was 92, and he said, I think he was, and he said, yeah, I drink a bottle of wine a day. I drink a half a bottle with lunch and a half a bottle with dinner. And that's just about right, It helps if you can take that little half-hour nap after lunch.
Absolutely.
Very traditional French thing, once again.
Yes, or the Spanish siesta, somebody said. Totally. So you were those works and those changes to technique have really had a huge impact across the globe. And again, when it comes to really thinking about what 1976 meant, it was not just a moment in time, it was there was this movement, right, all around it. There were people doing things. You graduated from Davis when?
So my undergrad degree from Santa Cruz is American Lit.
Well, that fits.
But then, for some reason, a bunch of us ended up at Davis in the second half of the 70s, 76 to 79.
Exactly.
We decided we wanted to be winemakers. So Johnny Koensgaard, Kathy Corson,
Right.
David Graves and Dick Ward of Saintsbury, Lee Hudson, Dan Lee of Morgan in Monterey, Randall Graham, Nick Martin I mentioned. So
what a class reunion that would be like. You would want every single autograph at that place. But that's my point, is that this was such an important time, and there were such important personalities and efforts being made, and the trailer and the documentary talked about mentorship, information being shared. And I want to bring in another wing of that movement, and we're going to move to glass number 4, because we've got...
We talked about glass number 3?
We talked about the Ramey, right?
Oh, this is my estate.
Yes.
18.
The 18 estate. And you're right, I messed up on the chocolate. It doesn't go that well. But it is salted caramel milk chocolate, which sometimes goes well with barrel fermented Chardonnay. But that's why we're here. We're here to experiment, and sometimes we fail. But we still got chocolate and delicious barrel fermented, bottle aged, beautiful estate grown wine from David Ramey. Another wing of the Chardonnay movement, which I think is a really fun one to look at, because it was also a part of a tasting that was quite, that turned a lot of heads, is the Trefethen. And we do have Lorenzo Trefethen. If you want to join us here, it would be great. We're tasting the 2016. We're tasting the 2016.
18 was delicious.
Right? Incredible. The number 4, you've got the 2016, and I remember a couple of things about Chardonnay from Trefethen from the very beginning, but then we'll talk about kind of what sort of put specifically your Chardonnay on the map.
Yeah.
But I remember when I got to Windows on the World, one of the first things that Kevin Zraly talked to me about was, well, we have this library program. And it was a time when wine was a lot more accessible from a price perspective. We were able to put bottles back, right? And able to hold things back and buy them and not list them for years, right? That doesn't really happen easily anymore because wine has gotten expensive. But he said to me, but we have this whole program that Trefethen does where they do a library and then they release library bottled wines, so they hold it back and still release it at a fair price. So we had 3 or 4 vintages from their library collection. And I remember just thinking, oh, this is so incredibly cool, because I could take it to a table and it would be affordable, but still show people, here's what bottle aged, Chardonnay can look like. And so I think that commitment was a big one. From your family, but you also, kind of had the inspiration to do that because your Chardonnay got some early recognition, actually prior to the Paris tasting, it was just a little bit after.
The Judgment of Paris was the opening shot. It was sort of the announcement to the world that, hey, California was doing something of interest. And the French did their best to ignore that tasting. But Stephen, God bless his soul, was always a fan of the underdog, kept talking about the thing that he had done. And that started getting under a few people's skin. And in 1979, the French put together what was at the time by far the largest competitive wine tasting the world had ever seen, called it Les Olympiades de Vin. Was organized by Goey Millot magazine, who were given the Michelin guide a run for their money at the time. And they gathered wines from 33 countries under one roof, which had never been done before. If I was taking a SOM exam today and asked to name 33 countries that make wine, I'd kind of peter out in the 20s, I think. So it was,
wow.
And in 1979, the world of wine was so much smaller than it is today. And so it really was sort of, everyone was there, and they did this big tasting in Paris, and when Trefethen Chardonnay was declared the best Chardonnay in the world, no one was more surprised than my parents.
So let's take a look at that label.
There you go. That was that was our Time magazine.
She looks
feature.
like she's 13 years old there, but yeah, that's just I had to show that. I love that picture so much. We're tasting the 16 right now.
The 16. I decided to make the math easy tonight. We'll just go 10 years back. But we should actually talk about vintage at some point. You've got a tremendous variation in the wines in front of us, and it's actually like a coherent flight. Which
well, good, because I didn't really give that too much thought. It was sort of like each wine has a reason to be there, but not because of the vintage. So what's your thought process on that? I
was surprised actually at the sort of general freshness of the wines in front of you. And I was definitely expecting to be the oldest Chardonnay here tonight, and darn it. I want to bring a little bit of sort of not just a historical story, but historical context to bear, and say that Chardonnay may be one of the goat grapes, but in 1968, when my family came to the Napa Valley, it was nowhere. When my grandfather started, first of all, grapes were nowhere. When my grandfather started ripping out walnut trees, which were the money crop here in Napa Valley, to plant grapevines, everyone thought he was crazy. And then he started planting a grape that nobody had. And as funny as it is to say today, that grape was called Chardonnay. In 1968, there were fewer than 1,000 acres of Chardonnay in the state of California. And he went out and consulted with the two people at Davis, who David probably remembers, Professors Amarine and Olmo. And they came over and they said, you have a Burgundian climate, plant Burgundian varieties. So we planted Chardonnay and Pinot Noir and a few other things that we like to drink. And that was the first major new planting of grapes, and certainly of Chardonnay, since Prohibition.
Those same two guys said that Russian River was too cold to plant grapes.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So much that we learn. So I have a question for you, because you mentioned about the passing multiple French-owned sparkling wine houses, and I'm just curious. And then you talked about your incredibly storied class at UC Davis. What was there a Chardonnay that got you into wine, or was there some other wine that did?
Oh, well, it's a long time ago. So
maybe a couple of them, right?
No, I spent out of Santa Cruz. I spent a quarter at UC Berkeley, and I stayed in the house up in the El Cerrito Hills of a classmate from Santa Cruz, and her mother worked for the University of California, and she used to have soirees, we call them, with 6 or 8 or 10 grad students, professors, postdocs at her house overlooking the Bay Bridge in San Francisco and Alcatraz. And these dinners with people that I didn't even know, they could go on for 3 hours. And that's what made me a winemaker. I realized I grew up in a household where, sad to say, wine wasn't there. There wasn't any alcohol. My parents would split one 16-ounce can of Schlitz beer during the news before dinner. And when I realized that wine could bring people together, that's what got me started. It wasn't a particular wine.
Right.
It was the sociability factor of wine with food.
Yes. Right?
That's exactly what did it for me. I do have a wine. Can I share my wine?
Yeah, but you grew up with wine. But yes, you
can
share your wine.
My wine was it was $2 from Trader Joe's.
Oh.
And we had it in college at a formal dinner. Whoever was in charge went out and got
a formal dinner.
Yeah, they had a budget. And so they went out and got something, and I didn't realize just how spoiled I was until that exact moment. And I had a little care package from home, And so I went up to my room, brought down some Trefethen wine, and instantly became the most popular table.
How about that?
And it was, but it was that ability of not just wine, but great wine, to bring people together, to elevate that ordinary experience of a meal to something that you remember for the rest of your life and can tell to a studio audience. That really made me get into the family business.
No, it's true. Mine was, in terms of that $2 Chuck thing, my thing was in college was Lindemann's Bin 65 Chardonnay and microwave popcorn. So I've been doing the popcorn and Chardonnay thing for a long time.
Is really
but it really is great. I do want I want you to try. You've got a little taste of the Grove. It's called a Croque Madame, and I think you could do it as one bite. But I would suggest that you bite it and try it with the Ramey Cellars, and then I suggest you try your other bite with your Trefethen, because this is a nice. It's got a depth to it. It's got a classical character to it. Croque Madame is a classical French preparation, and when you are doing these classical iterations on Chardonnay, which I think is really the way to do it, as opposed to the ones that are kind of steroided up on mallow and sugar, then you really want that kind of classical iteration, or popcorn. Those are your two choices. Just kidding. But actually grilled cheese is really great, especially if it's a grilled great cheese like this one. And this cheese is just across the lineup of Chardonnays is spectacular. Now, just a little bit, we're going to wrap up with our last wine, which is...
Can I ask really quickly, did anyone like the Trefethen Chardonnay? And can I tell you why we had that library program?
Why did you have it?
So you mentioned those French chateaux from Champagne specifically, and one that you enjoyed at the beginning of this evening, Domaine Chandon. They came to Napa very early.
1973 is what I understand.
Very early, pre-Paris tasting. They went around the world. They said, we've done a comprehensive survey of the world these last 2 years. We're going to open our first property outside of Champagne. It's going to be in Napa Valley. That's where we think that the next great wine region is going to be.
Just saying, what do they know about terroir? Oh, they invented it.
Yeah, and so what do you need to make champagne? You need Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Well,
right.
We had Champagne and Pinot Noir, so they came to us. And Domaine Chandon, the first 5 vintages, they grew up at Trefethen. They were making wine in our building from our grapes. And in order to get the contract, they took my parents to France on a little tour, and this was something they did not need to do. We would have been thrilled to sell them any grapes. And but when they checked into the Champagne facility, they asked my dad when he was born, and my dad was born in 1945, which was a great vintage, but there were some other things happening in France that sort of made the vintage a little tricky. And later that night at dinner, they disgorged at the table a bottle of champagne that was essentially Dom from 1945. It had been sitting sur lit that whole time.
Oh my goodness.
That made such an impression on my parents that they came back and they started saving many cases of every wine that we've ever made. We've got a full library to this day, but we brought it out and shared it with the world in our library selection.
That's so cool. And I'm glad that you mentioned 1945, because as part of this documentary production, and Tim and Noel and I were talking to Veronique Drouin up in Oregon, I said we wouldn't have a country without France because of the Revolution and Lafayette and Rochambeau. And she said, well, we wouldn't have a country without America in World War II. And that's a really cool thing. And just like keeping our friendships alive is so special, and keeping them alive over wine is even more so. So I'm running a little bit over, but this last wine deserves some serious attention. And first of all, though, the Croque Madame with the Ramey Cellars wine, pretty special, right? Delicious. I mean, these wines are so good on their own, but they're so over the top with food, right? And that's
That's where the magic is.
That's where the magic is, absolutely. So our last wine, though, is another example of the movement of 50 years ago. And in this case, we've talked a bit about mentorship and about collaboration with a lot of different, very talented people. And a lot of people say, especially standing in this building, and Mr. Mondavi's seat apparently in this room was right there. And so if you felt a little bit of a, somebody walking past you, it was the ghost of Mr. Mondavi. And Julia Child stood right there. He was probably the ultimate example, or one of the ultimate examples of the rising tide lifts all ships. And we're only as good as our weakest link. And so everything we do and learn and perfect, we share.
We share with our friends and neighbors.
And so with that in mind, and then the idea that terroir exists outside France, and the it's been eye-opening to me to have people like Piero Antinori and Laura Catena say, that's what we thought. Terroir didn't exist anywhere but France. Robert Mondavi really went all over, not just Napa Valley, in offering encouragement to other places with potential. So this last wine represents that. This is the Leeuwin Estate Art Series Chardonnay from Margaret River. And Robert, let's take a look. You see him there with Dennis Horgan, and basically he convinced them to plant grapes. He said, you guys should be growing Chardonnay and Cabernet here. And they said, tell us more. And so they did. And this is a wine that they made available to us in 2011. It's bottled under screw cap, so it probably has even many, many more years ahead of it, which is pretty astounding. But you can smell it, and you can get that sort of hazelnut character, that sort of reductive, sorry to use a technical term or a geeky industry term, flinty kind of quality that really is classical to especially a European style of Chardonnay. But this is one that in the 2018 vintage, in 2021, won the Judgment of Napa, which was a blind tasting, not California versus France, but California versus the world. And Steven Spurrier was originally going to be part of it. That's how I met him and how we got the idea for the documentary at all, because you saw him say it leveled the playing field for the world of wine, and that's really what caught our attention. But this tasting, the Leeuwin 2018 beat California, some of their top Chardonnays. Your wine was not in the lineup on that particular day, so otherwise it would have won, and yours was not either. That is true. However, it did also, that lineup included Italy, it included Grand Cru Burgundies. So it just tells you that, yes, terroir and terroir potential exists outside France. So give this one a try. And feel free to try it with especially the popcorn, but I think it's also probably going to be good with just about everything on the plate. Pretty much the Euphoria cheese to me is magic fairy dust for Chardonnay. It goes with all of them. And if you like your Chardonnay in the bubbly form, or even your Pinot Noir and Meunier in the bubbly form, it's also fantastic with traditional method sparkling wines, be they from Champagne or elsewhere. I don't know that we're going to find ourselves having access to 45 Dom anytime soon, but you don't need that. You can just bring the Euphoria cheese and get that piece of it. So I want to say thank you to both of you. First of all, what do we think of this wine? This is really quite something, right? And I feel like we could sit here, for the next hour and a half, 2 hours, and the wines would just evolve in the glass and continue to delight us.
Yeah. Did any of the wines that you had today seem at all tired? They
Not
seem
even
like
close.
they have a few more decades to run. I agree.
But offering a lot as well. So, closing thoughts. Well, what did you think about the Australian wine?
I loved it, and I know them, And I think along with my friend Rick Kinsman of Gioconda, they make the best Chardonnay in Australia. And it's partly because Bob was there and kind of, in a way, gave him a formula, so, I mean, they're making classic Neo-Burgundian Chardonnay in a very interesting and appropriate climate.
Well said. So for you, what's the perfect age to drink your Chardonnays?
Well, it's varying a little. This is which vintage? This is.
For you, it's 2018.
It's 2018.
Yeah, one of my favorites. That's such a good vintage.
So good.
So the closure. There's two things. There's three things that affect white wine ageability. One, as I said, was low tannin. Okay. The other is SO2 at bottling, and anybody who's afraid of SO2 at bottling is a fool. We just tasted a bunch of Chardonnays actually with Dan Berger, and the white Burgundy was shot. And it wasn't that old. I mean, it was like, I don't remember now, but it was 5 years older. So it was the color of bourbon. So of course we analyzed it, and it had no free SO2, and it had like a total of 10. I mean, SO2 is not your enemy. So, what else did you want me to talk about?
Well, just like
how old?
What's the ideal age for you for drinking your wines?
I mean, I think we make 30-year Chardonnays, but 20 years is interesting. 10 is a good. 10 years is a good point, which would be the 15s now. Yeah, so if I had to say 10 years from vintage would be a good point. But the new releases are delicious too. So, it's like you don't need to wait. You only need to wait if you buy more than you can drink in the first year.
And that's part of why Chardonnay is goated. It's delicious when well made across price points. It's delicious when well made across age. And the best examples, with a few exceptions, and their prices are driven by rarity rather than superior quality, don't set you back ridiculously. So that's what makes me really happy about that as a grape. And I just love that, because accessibility is exactly what the wine world needs right now. Things are expensive. Things are that warm hug, that welcome mat of a wine is exactly what we need. And then it's not just that; it's staggeringly complex and world class and ageable.
Can we introduce a 5-minute discussion of potentially some dispute between us?
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Yes. Okay. So
Malolactic.
let's see what the chat's saying here. They're asking us. Go. Oh, malolactic versus not.
Malolactic
versus not. Malolactic versus not.
All wines go through malolactic if it's not blocked. Like we use native yeast for the fermentation, and we use native bacteria for the malolactic. It's just what happens. It also happens to be what, in my opinion, makes Chardonnay the red wine of whites, along with back to barrels. The point of the barrel is it's a container. It gives the lees contact. The lees is very, very important for Chardonnay. But and so rather than block the malo, we accept it, and the diacetyl, which you've heard of, which the bacteria make, is this kind of buttery, that's metabolized by the yeast in the barrel. So our Chardonnay here doesn't stink of butterscotch, as some people think that, all wines go through malo by themselves. In fact, some of you may know that Condrieu in France, which is the grape there is Viognier, goes through malo. And the analysis show it has a very low total acidity, very high pH, both 4. 4.0 TA, 4.0 pH. And so, but let me just surmise, and then I'll give you a chance.
I appreciate that.
The tradition, particularly in Napa Valley, was to block the mallow. So the early producers, Trefethen, Montelena, Spring Mountain, you know, blocked mallow, thinking, I think, that, well, we're warmer here than Burgundy, so we have to preserve acidity. We want to block the mallow. Now, I consulted for a while for Diana Snowden, who's married to Jeremy Sess of Dujac, and I was having lunch at 11 Madison Park in Manhattan with a sommelier, and he said, he said, oh, they can't add acid in Burgundy. I said, well, they add acid in Burgundy, and he said, well, they can't do that, which he was wrong. What they legally can't do is add sugar, and then acid, to the same cuve, the same tank. They do it anyway. They, you know, in fact, that was
because they are French.
It's just a suggestion.
So I was at 11 Madison Park, and I called Diana. I said, hey, I'm sitting with this somm in Manhattan, and he says, you guys can't add acid? And she laughed. She said, we buy it by the pallet. So acidification is standard procedure in Burgundy, and with Chardonnay, when you may want to do that is not because the acid is low, but because the percentage malic acid in that particular vineyard, that particular vintage, is a little too high. If it's over about 50%, you'll have a bigger pH shift. And so you add a little bit of tartaric acid to the juice, and that allows you to go through mallow without making a flabby wine. Go.
So I'm just going to really quickly say that this is
extra credit.
The moral of this story is that sommeliers are a pain in the ass, and so sorry about that. But I could hang on the chemistry all day. You go, and then we will wrap up because people, including you and your beautiful wife, probably have dinner reservations.
We do.
What you got?
We started making wine before anybody knew what malolactic fermentation was, and so we weren't blocking it out of any. I'll just say you went to Davis. My dad didn't. He did steal a book from Davis after flunking out of high school chemistry that he was essentially making wine from. And, you know, yeah, you use sulfur, just like the Dutch in the 1500s. We now use mallow as a winemaking tool. In our Chardonnay, the Chardonnay that you had today, only 8% of it went through mallow. Those were sort of the barrels that escaped. But we use it as a sort of vintage tool. Depending on how the vintage is, we'll use more or less of it to soften the wine in a cool vintage, or we'll use less of it in a warm vintage. And that seems, you know, that's where we've landed. Where we are in the Napa Valley as opposed to the Russian River Valley, we're definitely farming for freshness, and I think where I want to end is by getting away from the winemaking and back to the wine growing. Something that is of unusual significance of the wines that you had tonight is they all came from a particular place. Most wine isn't made that way. Most wine is blended from all over the place. And rather than talking about how we make the wine, I would talk about how we grow it and about the uniqueness of the vineyard that we operate in. And just at Trefethen, the one thing that confounds everybody when they come to visit, if they have any winemaking or sommelier, God forbid, knowledge, is the variety of wine varieties that we grow. We're not just growing Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, we're also growing Cabernet, we're also growing Riesling. And that makes no sense until you start to dig into what's happening underneath the ground, where we have 20 different soil types. Of the 33 that have been identified in Napa, we've got 20 in our one vineyard. And we've got this extraordinarily unique climate. David talked earlier about the fog banks that sit off the California coast, and where we are in the Oak Knoll district, we're right at the mouth of the funnel that brings that fog into Napa Valley. So yeah, if you go a little bit farther up from us, it gets a little bit warm to grow things like Chardonnay. And if you go farther south from us, it gets a little cool to grow things like Cabernet. But where we are is this unbelievable place that doesn't make any sense until I walk people into the garden and I show them that we're growing oranges next to apple trees. And that starts to like complete the circle.
Florida versus Maine and Washington, yeah.
Calistoga, you can, in the right time during harvest, you can see the fog coming over from Santa Rosa.
Right.
So it's actually the hot spot in Napa Valley is where what is it? Hourglass, where it's narrow. Right, just north of St. Helena, because the Micomas blocks that ocean influence.
Right.
Well, I love that you brought up the farming, and I wish we had a whole nother hour to talk about that.
I'm gonna say one thing. It's half the grapes, and it's half what you do with them. Okay.
Especially in Chardonnay.
Especially in Chardonnay. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. That's very well said. And I'm going to close it with this. I'm going to actually bring on my colleague, Kim Oshiro, to wave into the camera, because she would be the person who would explain to you all of the, come here. Kim is America's, come here a little closer, the world's most newly minted, you can tuck yourself right here, minted master of wine. And I wanted you to meet her, because she would be the person that would be able to explain all of the science of this, because she is really, really good at that stuff. And man, what a palate. And thank you for your help today. Thanks to all of our, and you can stand up, thank you. Thank you. Sorry that framing did not work out to give you the right spot. But I am really, really grateful to everyone for coming, and David and Lorenzo for all that you had to contribute here. Thank you for the beautiful wines, and for the importance to this place and this time, and the 40, I'll say 50 years that got us to this point, because you've really, your families and you, David, specifically, have contributed so much to that. It's just a joy to be a part of a community like that, and to know that it's just what they do, and that we get to take their artistry and their craft and enhance our everyday lives with it. And I've taken that as a sommelier as a big responsibility to share that with everyone. And my job is the easy part, and that's probably, like I said, why sommeliers are insufferable, because we think we're so important, when what's really important is this. So thank you all, and the most important of all, of course, is the customer, because we wouldn't be here without you. So cheers to everyone, all of you, for coming. Cheers. And see you at the next episode. Goated Grapes. Thank you. Goated Grapes, Cabernet Edition. Speaking of sommeliers, Master Sommelier Carlton McCoy will be my guest. And we will see you soon. Take good care of yourselves. Hug each other, love each other. And we will, and we'll see you again soon. But it'll be on April 15th, Tax Day.